my opinion, the best study on this subject comes from Prouse and colleagues, who had women actually handle 3D physical models and pick their favorite. And the reason this method is so good.
Hey guys, it's Hink here. So what happens when you give a bunch of women a bunch of 3D models of PPs and ask them to pick their desired size? Well, you get this study here, okay? And so the study is talking about women's preference for penis size, a new research method using selection among 3D models. Now, one of my very first videos, which, I'm going to have Callie roll some footage of this somewhere on the screen. It actually has done very, very well for my channel, but I had some interesting takes and I want to go back on it. Now, this guy's video is very concise, very poignant. I wanted to actually use it as a framework because this guy actually knocks us out of the park. I mean, one of the best videos I've seen on YouTube, quite honestly. So I'll put the link in the description. Go check it out. But guys, there is a lot we need to discuss because there's a lot that I got right, but there's actually some things that I got wrong. And, just like me, I think there's actually some things that this guy got a little bit wrong too. And so we're going to talk about it today. But after this, go watch his video, check it out, and leave him some love and tell him that Hink sent you.
Colleagues who had women actually handle 3D physical models and pick their favorite. And the reason this method is so good is because it gets around standard mismeasurements and misreporting issues, right? Like a woman might say in a pen and paper survey or in a conversation that she prefers 8 inches or 3 inches, but the problem with just asking is that you don't know that she knows how big or small that actually is. So unlabeled 3D models that you can physically interact with, that's really the gold standard here. And in this
So yes, guys, he's spot on in the sense that, you've even seen my clips recently of women trying to pull out how big is 6 inches, and they're nowhere close. It's anywhere between 4 or 5 inches. The point is that you can't just ask women what their size is. And so this actually got around that. It actually said, here's a 3D model. The problem is, even with models, there are just some fudging outlandish responses to this. I thought the data was actually better than it is, but guys, some of these answers are absolute dog shit. We're going to get back to that in a second, but even just, guys, the participants, I've talked about it before, but when you have studies that are about these sexually provocative studies, you are going to select women that are going to feel more comfortable talking about this, which are typically more sexual experience. Guys, I posted this study before, okay? It shows that women that have more sexual experience are going to be the ones more likely to favor the importance of actual size of the penis. Now, guys, here are actual demographics from this study here, so I'm not crazy. In this study, the average number of intercourse partners was 6. Now, guys, if you look at that study I just put up, it had the number of partners from 1 to 2, 3 to 5, or greater than 5. And so just in that study, we're already at the upper limit, which clearly showed that there was a preference in as far as they view both penile length and penile girth far more important, or sometimes even very important. We have to take these results with a grain of salt because of the type of women giving the answers. These are not your average women. The other extreme of this is, in this study, there were 75 women. 15 of the women had not even had sex. So how are you going to have a study asking about your preferred, basically, penis size for sexual intercourse? Meanwhile, 20% of your participants haven't even had sex. It's like a study asking guys their preference on boob size when they've never felt a pair of boobs before.
When you grab a woman's breast and you feel it, and it feels like a bag of sand when you're touching it.
Bag of sand?
In this study, women selected, on average, obviously there's a lot of variance, but on average, they selected 6.3 inches for a long-term relationship and 6.4 inches for a short-term relationship. That's 16.2 centimeters for those who think in that system. Now, you might be thinking, well, that sounds kind of average, but men are very generous when estimating themselves, and women are somewhat generous when estimating men as well. One study found, for example, that men tend to overestimate their size by about 21%. So, rule of thumb, whatever he says he is, you can subtract an inch from that. Whatever you think he is, subtract an inch.
He's exactly right. I'll put the data on the screen where you can see. Now, he does bring up some really good points about the fact that in self-reported data, men lie. Please see my video on actual averages, okay? But I break down this self-reported data versus measured data, and all my gay bros out there, you guys are the ones that lie the worst, and it's on average about 1.25 inches bigger than what your actual measured size is.
The real average in a meta-analysis of 17 studies was 5.16 inches, about 13.1 centimeters. And while it's feasible that number could be off, it's not going to be off by a lot. And if you look at the distribution here, 6.3 inches would be about 95th percentile. If you're walking down the sidewalk, it's about as common as seeing a guy who's 6'2". It's not unheard of, but it's not particularly common.
So guys, we have to actually talk about the averages they used on this study. So first of all, they use an average of 6 inches in length by 5 inches in girth. They basically relate that to the prior research, and I'll put the paragraph on the screen, but they use several dog shit studies and actually talk about how bad the studies are when it comes to actually measuring length. And the studies that they quote, the averages are somewhere between 5 to 5.5 inches. So I honestly do not know where they got an average of 6 inches from. So guys, in this study that came out after the Am I Normal study, so guys, this Am I Normal study looked at over 15,000 men and found that the average PP size was about 5.2 inches in length and about 4.8 inches in girth. And so they completely failed to include or reference that entire study, which personally I think would have dramatically decreased the size that they used for average in their study. This is where shit gets crazy. When I was reading back through this study, like I legit wanted to ask the women on this study, "What are you retarded?" But guys, look here at the reported averages using the 3D models. In fairness, most of these averages, so if you look at kind of the left lower quadrant, like most of the reported averages are basically below 6 by 5 inches, where you can see that like circle in the middle or to the right-hand part of the screen is the actual average size. But there are women that, number one, reported 8 inches to be what they believe to be an average length. So like, I don't care what you believe the average to be, like you're a fudging idiot if you think that their average length is actually 8 inches. You're just a stone cold idiot. This was either one of those chicks that had never touched a penis before, or it was a chick that I don't know what she was high when she was doing this. The other thing, guys, if you look at girth, so circumference on the bottom, there were 3 women that thought 6 by 6 was average. Guys, a 6-inch girth is gigantic. So here's a mini Hinks reality check. Here's a Reddit post I found with pretty credible sources that listed all of the adult stars that are 6 inches in girth. And so she's saying that the average thickness of some of these like massive adult stars is 6 inches is the average length of the average man. Like, it's just so stupid. And so this alone destroys the credibility of this whole entire freaking study.
And since most women will only be with between a few and several men in their entire lives, this means that most women actually won't encounter a cylinder that big. And this is backed by the same study. They also had women select the biggest that they'd seen in the wild and the smallest that they'd seen in the wild to get an idea. And you can see that most women hadn't seen that big, which is quite interesting because again, you hear 6.3, 6.4, and you think, oh, that preference, it sounds really modest, really reasonable. But then you realize that in this sample, women were selecting a preference for a size that was bigger than they had ever encountered. It's pretty interesting. And again, a lot of you are going to be surprised by this. If you haven't measured from the top side with a ruler, you really have no idea.
So guys, this is an excellent point as well. So hats off to you, Mac. And when you actually look at this image that they put on here, where it says penis size experience, when you look as far, especially when it comes to length, most women, even if you look at all the way on the right side of the screen, the largest they had, it's usually below about 6 at most to 6.5 inches. There's very few women that have reported having a PP that was any size bigger than that. There's even, at least one woman that reported about an 8-inch length. Like, that's not completely out. I mean, that's within the realm of reasonable. Where we lose all fudging gosh darn credibility is when you look at the width side of this. There are basically 3 women that reported a girth, experiencing the largest girth of about 7 inches, and one even including 8 inches. The girth of a fudging Coke can is 8 inches. This woman said that she was with a guy that had a girth the size of a Coke can, okay? Another mini Hinks reality check. I don't suggest you look this guy up because it might make you feel bad about yourself, but there's a guy named Girth Master. He's one of the thickest dudes I've ever seen in my entire existence. Dude self-admittedly says that he is between 7 to 7.125 inches in girth. And he is like an freaking anomaly. One of the biggest girths in like the entire industry, if not the biggest. And there are several chicks saying that, oh yeah, I had a guy that big. No, you didn't. You didn't, guys. Of the 75 women, there were 3 that had approximately that size. Absolute bullshit. The odds of that happening, statistically impossible. Just meeting a guy with a girth that big, statistically impossible. So anyways, I've said it before. 6 inches non-bone pressed is big. I'm just going to go ahead and put that out there again.
And for circumference, it's a similar story, right? Women preferred 4.8 inches for long term, 5 inches for short term, about 12.2 centimeters and 12.7 centimeters respectively. And again, might not sound big, but bigger than the average man, which is about 4.59 inches or 11.66 centimeters in circumference.
I think, especially when you're talking about like a normal standard distribution range, 5 versus, 4.7 inches, I don't think we're talking about that big of a difference. All of the studies show that girth typically is more important when it comes to women's pleasure. If you haven't seen my video on like size and satisfaction, please check that out after this.
So the big picture here, if you step out and look at it holistically, is that most men are much smaller than what the average woman prefers in this domain.
That's actually a very valid conclusion to say that the size that women on the study want is actually much bigger than most guys. It actually gets worse than that. Strap in and sit down for this because you're probably not going to like this part. You might just want to skip ahead to the next timestamp. Here are the preferences that they have as far as length and girth for the one night versus the long-term partners. Is a pretty interesting diagram they put up between 6.3 and 6.4 inches. Let's just assume 6.4 inches bone pressed. 6.4 inches bone pressed is basically 2 standard deviations bigger than the average, assuming it's somewhere between 5 or somewhere around 5.2, according to that Veal study. So like he said, this is basically almost outside of the range where 95% of guys will fit. So we are talking about she is wanting actually something quite large, regardless of like girl inches or like adult industry inches. I mean, real life inches, that is very big if we're talking bone pressed. So guys, I'm going to put us some charts. So I advise you to take some time, pause the screen, and you can see when it comes to length, what percentage of guys you are going to be bigger than. If you look at the bottom, all the way towards the bottom of the curve at 6.5, there's a very small percentage of men that are going to be bigger than you. And guys, honestly, same thing with girth. So here's a graph showing the girth. Again, when you look at that like 5-inch girth, we're talking about, really there's like 15% of guys that are going to be actually bigger than you when you look at these statistically speaking.
But wait, there's more.
What really sucks, guys, is they're talking about non-bone pressed. Bone pressed is when you actually like take your ruler and you push it and smash it all the way down into your fat pad so it's all the way against your pubic bone. Non-bone pressed is just when you set the ruler up and you measure what's visible. Look at these 3D models they used. You can see that they're very clearly like non-bone pressed, okay? They didn't say, okay, now imagine you had a fat pad here. How far would you press it? Like, if you haven't seen my video about bone pressed versus non-bone pressed, watch that after here. Because like, I don't know, I get very triggered by this fucking argument. The point is, in this Am I Normal nomogram, if you look at the methods, they only included bone pressed measurements. Depending on your body mass index, well, Hink, everybody knows that body mass index isn't exactly correct, because what if you're a bodybuilder and you have a lot of muscle? Jesus Christ. Like, they're mostly accurate, okay? Let me know in the comments. All the comments help the algorithm. The point is that depending on your BMI, your fat pad, if you're lean, is usually going to be around 1/2 inch. If you're overweight, it's going to be about 1 inch. And if you're obese, it's going to be somewhere around 1 to 2 inches. And if you're normally obese, it can be as high as 3 inches. Guys, the average BMI, at least in the good old US of A, let's just say if somebody between 20 to 30 years old is about 29. So looking at that, we're looking at 1 inch fat pad. So in this study, they're talking about 6.4 inches non-bone pressed. According to like your average fat pad of about 1 inch, they're really talking about a 7.4 inch PP is the desired one. I know, like that sucks. That hurts. That hurts to hear that, but it's true. There is a bright side. But I'm just saying, on this study, how that would translate to a man is either you're going to be very lean and have a 6.4 inch PP with very little fat pad, or you're going to be your average body weight guy and you're going to have a 7.4 inch PP to get this ideal size that they want in this study.
But that's number one. Number two, the natural question is how much do women care? You can do, again, pen and paper survey and just say how much do you care? But that really doesn't give you much behavioral insight. I think that this Browse study asks a really good question, which is how many of you have actually ended a relationship partially over a man's size? Because that's when we get, behavioral deal breaker, so to say. And in this study, about 27% of women reported ending a relationship partially because of a man's size. And in the vast majority of cases, it was because they were too small, not too big.
So guys, he's exactly right here. There were some women that said that they would end a study. But guys, if you look at how the question was worded, they said, have you ever stopped seeing a man because, among other reasons, his penis was either too large or too small compared to what you wanted? So they're not saying everything else was perfect and you just dumped him because of his size. So they're probably like, oh, well, he was a prick and he had a small prick. Or he was poor and he had a small prick or something like that. So it's not just size that is causing these ladies to dump their guys. And guys, like, he doesn't emphasize enough that there were a substantial amount of women that actually said that they would dump their guy if they were too big.
Now, in terms of how to think about this, I would say that the analogy of heights that we've been using for the distributions applies here as well. Is it true that in the abstract, all else being equal, most women would prefer that you're 95th percentile for height, right? 6'2", or 95th percentile for this, 6.3, 6.4? Yes, in both of those domains, most women will prefer taller or longer than they've ever had a relationship with. However, the fact that they've had relationships with men who are not that says that it's not the only thing in the world. Sometimes some men will be short enough that it's a deal breaker for many women. That certainly seems to be something that happens, but that doesn't mean you're doomed if you're not 6'2". There are women out there who this isn't a large priority for, and there are many other things that contribute to a man's attraction.
He absolutely knocks it out of the park with this, and I actually hadn't thought about this way. And so, especially when you look at some of those sides about like what they actually experience, women can say, I want a man who's 6'2", but they can still date 5'8" guys, but just be like, oh yeah, in an ideal world, I want a man that's 6'2". You know, it's not fair, guys. Especially to all my short kings out there. But the fact of the matter is, like, women can say, like, yeah, if everything were equal, I would love a guy that was about 6.4 inches, non-bone pressed. But that doesn't mean that, number one, matches up with true averages, or number two, that she actually wants that big. So don't think just because you might not have like a 6.4 inch peepee that she's going to leave you for some guy that does, because that's just not reality, and that's just not what the data is saying either. So guys, what are my closing thoughts? Well, number one, like, this data is better than most of the stuff out there, but there's still so many freaking flaws with this study. 20% of the women had not even had sex. There were just some outlandish numbers that were thought to be either the average sizes or reported sizes they actually had. Like that one girl who said, yeah, the biggest girth she had was literally the size of a can of Coke. I think this study is helpful to say that, like, yeah, you know, women aren't saying, oh yeah, my ideal size is going to be 14 inches. It's actually about 6.4 inches. But truly, like, when you think about 6.4 inches non-bone pressed for a one-night stand or whatever, or 6.3 inches for a long-term relationship, keeping in mind average body fat percentage in the United States, we're actually talking about 7.4 inches bone pressed, which is, you know, actually very, very large. What can you do about it? Well, number one, you can ignore this effing data and live your life and not worry about, like, your size, because I guarantee you there's been studies showing that about 87% of women are very content with the size that their man has, regardless. That's option number one, and probably the best and healthiest option. Along with that, you can find a chick that likes you for you, that doesn't actually care about your pee-pee size. Number three, you can get a chick with a very low body count, okay? It might take some searching. You might have to look in different places in your YouTube rather than just like swiping to the left or right, whatever the effing direction is on Twitter, Tinder, whatever. I'm an old man, I don't do that shit. Also, guys, be as lean as freaking possible. Tired of debating fat people in the comments about what matters more between bone pressed or non-bone pressed. Bone pressed is measured for, like, tracking progress and having the most scientifically accurate, but that's the only effing way that it matters. If you have a 7-inch peepee and you have a 3-inch fat pad, people are going to think you have a 4-inch peepee, period, end of story. But usable length, Hink, I don't care, guys. Like, I don't care. Also, you can get bigger, okay? There's proven science showing that you can enlarge the size of your penis. I recently published my Hink trial. With photographs, you can see that on average in 6 months, guys gained a 1/2 inch in length and a 1/4 inch in girth, okay? The link is going to be in the description, probably going to be in the pinned comment, so if you're interested, check it out, okay? I also have a course where I teach you, based on real scientific methods, how to actually increase the size of your penis. And guys, also, what matters more than size is actual hardness, okay? Your erection quality. Please remember, guys, you're so much more than the size of your D. Be the best version of yourself. There's nothing wrong with self-improvement, but you are enough just as you are. All right, guys. And of course, coaching consultation, guys, link is in the description below. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace and love.
Dr. Hink got the plug on the health, yeah. Got you thinking about your wealth, yeah. In his office, no stealth, yeah. Pinnacle of that below the belt, yeah. Checks and balance, he's managing. Working miracles, no damage. Got you covered, no panicking. Steady calm. In the clinic, no vanishing. Yeah, with Doc Hink, it's the way back.